Deathpixie disclaimer. This video was originally recorded in September 2024. There is swearing and profanity. Sources are listed in the description. This video is not monetized. Any ads you see provide revenue to the hosting site, not the creators. If you made it this far, geez, you have a lot of patience.
Deathpixie dancing on the lip of madness!
Welcome to Shitty PowerPoint Theater. Dignity not included.
All right, not much more to say on Mr. Monopoly. Louis Saint Laurent. He became known as Uncle Louis, Papa Louis. He is credited as being the first prime minister with kind of a brand, to use today's terminology. He was a liberal. He and his wife, Jeanne Renault, had 5 children, including Jean-Paul. Jean-Paul is the child of note here. And yeah, he served, we can see, about almost 2 consecutive. Yeah. Served well. Now then, and you thought King did a lot. Oh man. So I'm gonna look at his major cons right now, because there's only 2 of them: the Trans-Canada Pipeline and the pipeline debate in 1956. It was felt that he rushed the debate on the Trans-Canada Pipeline by invoking closure. So it led some to believe that the Liberals had become arrogant after 2 decades in power. However you feel on the pipeline is how you feel. I know it is a controversial point even today. The high Arctic relocation, though, that is probably the biggest con. 92 Inuit were moved from Quebec to 2 communities in the Northwest Territories, which are now known as Nunavut. The relocation was a forced migration. It was meant to assert federal government sovereignty in the far north by use of human flagpoles in light of the Cold War and the disputed territorial claims of the Canadian Arctic archipelago. Those who were relocated were not given sufficient support to prevent extreme deprivation in their first 5 years after the move. Please note, just because the Arctic is cold doesn't make it any less of a desert. If you do not have the right supplies, it's a death sentence. So that was the big one. So, but the positives, he identified the 5 basic principles of Canadian foreign policy and the 5 practical applications regarding Canada's international relations. The federal ban on married women being hired for public service for positions was rescinded. The Inuit did, in fact, obtain the right to vote in Canadian federal elections. Oversaw the construction of the Trans-Canada Highway and the St. Lawrence Seaway. Universalization of old age pensions. Old age assistance for needy Canadians over 65. Allowances for the blind and disabled. Registered Retirement Savings Plan, or RSP. Amendments to the National Housing Act. Unemployment assistance, used $100 million in death taxes to establish the Canada Council to support research in the arts, humanities, and social sciences. Introduced the policy of equalization payments, which redistributes taxation revenues between provinces. This is a huge point of a contention, but I will say it helps other provinces and it helps people of the country. That being said, provinces who try to get out of doing this, we helped you. You need to help us.
Yeah.
So, it's a country. Negotiated the British North American Act number 2, which actually fully patriated the Canadian Constitution, ended the practice of appealing Canadian legal cases to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council of Great Britain, which made the Supreme Court of Canada the highest avenue of legal appeal, dramatically increased immigration in order to expand Canada's labor base and tax base for social assistance programs, had views on the UN military force in the form of the United Nations Emergency Force, so that's UNEF, or Peacekeeping Force, and activities with Pearson. This is widely believed to have avoided nuclear war. Big one.
Yeah.
He did have an addition of Section 88 into the Indian Act, which offloaded responsibilities from the federal government to the provinces. It can be viewed as a pro or a con. I do view it as somewhat of a pro because it's forcing provinces to come to the table on this, but it can be viewed as a pro and a con. Honestly, the Indian Act needs a full overhaul.
Yeah.
Leading proponent of the establishment of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, otherwise known as NATO. Again, this can be a pro or con depending on how you view NATO.
Yep.
I will note that the number of First Nation students in day schools run by Indian Affairs actually expanded between 1945 and 1955. So, basically, a lot of the changes that I'm talking about in Section 88 kind of contain to who is controlling those schools. It was believed that Indigenous children would receive a better education as a result of their transition into a public school system. So we are seeing now the integration of Indigenous students into public school rather than residential school. This was a long process, and also still does not negate the fact that when we're talking about students who are in fly-in only, very small and isolated communities, you're still looking at them being taken away from the community, and that it's a point of contention and it's being made without anybody at the table who represents the concerned groups. Now then, big quote for him: "Our external policies shall not destroy our unity, for a disunited Canada will be a powerless one." So that was a big point for him. He did, in fact, support King's decision to introduce conscription in 1944. He emphasized national unity and political liberty and rule of law in the sense of opposition to totalitarianism. He is considered to have been presiding over Canada's golden age, and he was the first prime minister to live at the prime minister's residence. Overall, there's a quote from Robert Gordon Robertson that St. Laurier's administrations from 1949 to 1956 probably gave Canada the most consistently good, financially responsible, trouble-free government in the country. Government the country has had in its entire history. He, in fact, did do a 42-day-long tour around the world to get a bigger picture of world issues. And also remember, this is post-World Wars and depressions and stuff. He's trying to see what's going on the global scale. And my favorite quote about St. Laurent, do you want to hear it?
Sure.
Jack Pickersgill said, St. Laurent had made governing Canada look so easy that the people thought anyone could do it, and thus they elected John Diefenbaker. I thought it was
I'm sorry,
great.
that is hilarious.
Yeah. And then my favorite funny quote. So he was actually raised bilingual. All he knew, he's quoted as saying he just thought that there was one way to speak to my father and another to speak to my mother. So an example of we're seeing it becoming, a requirement to basically be bilingual. And my favorite quote by him is, "Socialists are liberals in a hurry." He had multiple degrees.
Yes, he did.
He was a lawyer for corporate, commercial, and constitutional law in Quebec. He became one of the country's most respected counsels. Very famously, He, in 1907, put a priest and a nun on the witness stand and cross-examined them. It was unheard of at the time. He also won a case against Canada Pacific, and he was one of the defending counsel for Henry Kendall Thaw, who was seeking to avoid extradition from Quebec. So he did a lot of stuff there. He did a case before the Supreme Court, where he argued for religious minority non-Christian rights. So that was quite interesting. Though an ardent liberal, he always remained aloof from active politics for much of his life, focusing instead on his legal career and family, and became a highly regarded in law. He was twice offered a seat as a justice on the Supreme Court of Canada, and he declined them both. He was also a professor of law and served as president of the Canadian Bar Association. He was a minister of justice under Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King. Why? Because King appealed to his sense of duty. He also represented Canada at the San Francisco Conference that helped lead to the founding of the United Nations. There is a lot here. There's a lot on like a defector and Lawrence involvement with that, his involvement with the UN. He was a supporter of Newfoundland joining Canada. There was a lot that he did. He became prime minister, did everything I said. He was opposition leader. He retired from politics, returning to practice law. He said, "One can be more outspoken, frank, and sincere before the courts than he could before the public audience in a political campaign." And finally, about the pipeline, which I think you might be interested in. Perhaps I didn't say as much as I should have. People do make mistakes, you know. I did my best, and as a matter of fact, we had become accustomed to carry on as a board of directors, and that displeased part of the Canadian public. He also companion of the Order of Canada. So is there anything you'd like to say about him?
So he did a lot. He's alongside Mackenzie King, a formation of modern Canada, or did a lot to expand modern Canada the way that it is. What I do like about him is the shade.
Yeah.
He does shade fantastically. Not as much or not as great a shade as you could possibly have, but still, you're seeing the advent of newsprint media and using the media as a vehicle to educate and inform, and in many cases weaponize, because you're seeing a lot more shade within the past few prime ministers.
Yep.
Hey, this is Trapdoor Crabsworth for deathpixie. If you liked our content, please like this video and subscribe. And if you want to see more, just check out our links in the description. Do it. Do it or Miri will kill you.